Good evening and welcome to the digital age. I'm James Goodale. We've got a great show for you tonight. We have, as a guest, a person I would like to call Obama's secret weapon. He provided a lot of the brain power, the intelligence, and the software, because this is the digital age, for Obama's so-called ground game. Do you know what the ground game is? Well, you know if you watch our show. And I want to welcome Mark Sullivan from Voter Activation Network of Somerville, Mass. Thanks for coming by, Mark.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here.
Well, we're going to have a lot of fun with this program. It's so interesting because what you've done is you've built a database that propelled, in some respects, the ground game for the Obama campaign, and we want to get into how you did it and how it compares with the Republicans, so forth and so on. And the way you did it is through what is known as micro-targeting. So I want to just introduce the subject as follows by this quote. Micro-targeting is a technique to identify very narrow niches of interest. It refers to the targeting of individuals, in this case voters, by special interests, buying habits, and demographics. The Republican Party has made especially good use of this technique in 2004. The use of very sophisticated databases explains the Republican edge in battleground states, and thus even explains the results of the 2004 election. That's from Tom Hamburger, who wrote a book called One Party Country. How did the Republicans get that advantage in 2004?
Well, micro-targeting is it's been a relatively new concept in political campaigns. It's been around for a little longer than the sort of 4 years or so since 2004, and the Republicans, I think, had. In the years kind of leading up to 2004, they've been kind of a top-down party that has made some good decisions in terms of investing in some of the resources to do some of this kind of work, and Democrats were doing a little bit of it back then too. We were sort of playing a catch-up game since then, and I believe probably surpassed them somewhere along the line by the time the 2008 election rolled around.
Well, you think you surpassed them even before? Well, you would have had to if you didn't ultimately do it in 2008. How come you pass them by?
Well, because I think that we have different strengths than they do. They've got this kind of top-down strength, which means that they sort of, once micro-targeting came around, they were able to implement it a little bit faster. I think they caught on to it faster, and the party as an institution was able to sort of make it part of the national program a little bit faster. But then we've got advantages too. Democrats have always had, we're not as much of a top-down party. We're a little bit more of a grassroots up party. That can be both good and bad. It means sometimes it can take a little bit longer to sort of make stuff happen. Being a little bit more democratic is sometimes a little bit more sloppy. But on the other hand, we've got those people resources, and those people resources are really an important part of everything that it takes to sort of to target voters and to do a good micro-targeting operation. So, for example, I mean, if you take micro-targeting and you sort of take it apart, what really is it? What does it mean?
Yeah, what does it mean?
It's a couple of different things. Number one, it's having as much information, general information, as you can have about the voting population as a starting point. So you've got something like 170 million registered voters in the country. First of all, you need to know the basic core underlying public data that's available about those voters.
Wait, I want to just get clear. You're trying to get data on all 170 million from the get-go?
I think both parties have data on all 170 million voters.
170 million voters?
Sure. Much of this is public data. In every state, well, actually 49 of the 50 states maintain voter registration rolls that is public information to a degree, and so that information is made available in some cases to the general public. In Florida, you can buy core voter file data about every registered voter for $10. Anybody can. Other states, it's only made available to the political parties. The rules differ. But
what do you mean by core
Core voter file data is your name, your date of birth, the information that you fill out on a voter registration form when you register to vote.
Oh, I see.
In most states, that even includes party of registration. You might indicate that you're a Republican or a Democrat or unaffiliated, and sometimes that's important, of course, for voting in primaries. Date of birth is often part of that. In some states, particularly in the South, race is part of that. There's a race checkoff box on the form. So there is a sort of core underlying set of data that both parties start with as you know, your core data that you start off with. Then on top of that, there's a process. There's all kinds of ways to enhance that data. You know, you've certainly heard a lot about these commercial data sources. These have been around for ages. The stuff that, you know, people use to sell you credit cards. The parties, you know, in the last couple election cycles, have started to acquire more and more of that. That helps you build out more of a profile of those 170 million voters.
Well, no. For example, what would that be? Just
well, this could be data about finances, data about that helps you guess people's income levels. You always hear about the data about magazine subscriptions. Is one of these things. There's just all kinds of data that's floating out there around there, and the corporates have used it for years and years. Well, the political campaigns really sort of started to discover it in the last couple election cycles. So you're building out this kind of profile of voters, but then what micro-targeting really involves is trying to use that to glean much more at the almost individual level to prognosticate essentially about how individuals are likely to vote.
That's the part that just drives me bananas, to think that you take all that data, A, B, add to it, C, put it in a database, but not for general demographic trends. You're looking for me.
Well, we're looking for you, and there are a couple of ways we do that. So there's another piece that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is, well, how do I really extrapolate whether I think you're going to vote for Barack Obama or for John McCain, for example? Well, so what that involves is the next step is to do very intensive polling of some segment of the voting population. So I take some segment of the population and I talk to them in great detail about whether their likelihood to support particular candidates, how they feel about particular issues. I glean from them the outcomes that I'm looking for in everybody else.
How do you glean from them?
I'm sorry, I literally find out their actual opinions by polling them, by having extensive telephone conversations with them.
170 million people?
No, a sample. This is a sample. I'm polling a sample and finding out exactly how they feel about the specific political issues I'm dealing with.
But your samples are ones which will yield a generalization because they're a sample from Brooklyn, a sample from Manhattan, a sample from the Bronx, and so you therefore think if someone thinks this way, who has certain demographics in Brooklyn, somebody who matches that person will think the same way. Is that
right? The art and science of micro-targeting is taking the sample and then putting it next to all that other data I've collected and the data I've collected about all 170 million people, and then from there extrapolating out where I think all the individuals in the bigger file are going to end up. So what happens is, based on all of that, you end up sort of assigning scores to each individual voter based on that extrapolation. Likelihood to vote for a particular candidate, likelihood to respond to a particular issue, likelihood to vote, and likelihood to be likelihood to be persuadable. Is this a definition of somebody who, if I go and talk to that person more?
How do you know whether someone's persuadable or not?
Well, if you're polling people, you'll ask them, which candidate you support, and they'll say,
yeah, and that works for his neighbor whom you haven't polled?
It tends to work. There's math and science that suggests it works for people who share.
We don't have independent voters anymore. You can figure them out through a computer.
Well, there are patterns, and sure, you can't predict anything for sure, but you can come up with statistical margins of error that suggest that a person with particular underlying properties is likely to perform one way or another.
Let me ask you something. I don't want to stop this conversation, but you said a few seconds ago that in the last couple of cycles, both parties had been doing this.
Right.
But my impression in reading the material is that the master of all this was Karl Rove. Wasn't he way ahead of the Democrats in doing this? I mean, did the Democrats, for example, have the database that you just described back then in 2004?
We didn't. In fact,
But did he?
they were steps ahead of us for sure. I think they had more than we did.
So yeah.
So I mean, it's sort of going back in time a little bit. What we were, you know, when you think about technology in campaigns, and technology is making all this stuff, is making it really work. And when you think about technology in campaigns, in 2004, a couple of very different things were happening. The Republicans were really sort of mastering this data some steps out ahead of us. They had put together sort of a national voter file. They called it the voter vault. You've heard, you know, you read a lot about it. It comes up all the time.
Yeah.
Ooh, the Republicans have a voter vault. Well, we were a little bit behind in terms of actually having a truly national file. What we were doing was very, very innovative stuff. Remember Howard Dean and his presidential campaign?
Howard Dean, yeah.
Howard Dean, his presidential campaign in 2004.
He's the one who started for the Democrats, though, right?
He was doing incredibly innovative things, stuff that you didn't see on the other side.
Yeah, but the Democrats didn't pick that up as a whole.
It took us a little bit of time to pick it up as a whole.
Yeah, but I mean, in time for the 004 election.
In time for 2004.
So you had this funny thing where Dean was going ahead and getting his candidacy before the voters because he was mastering in small detail what you've described, but yet the Democrats, is it fair to say, dropped the ball?
Well, we were doing.
The Democrat National Committee has been known to drop the ball.
Sure. I mean, national party committees do drop the ball. That's for sure. No, I think we were doing different stuff, and so what we were, you know, now. I'll step back here for a second.
Yeah.
You know, my company doesn't actually do micro-target. We don't put the stuff in the black box and shake it up. What we do is we actually build out the software applications that are used to deliver this data. And so, you know, when we started doing this about 7 years ago, and the fact is, a lot of this happening on the Democratic side. A little more bottom up. A lot of this was happening at the state party level. It sort of kind of bubbled up from, you know, just as, you know, the technologies the Dean campaign was using, that they were out in front of, you know, blogging, raising money on the internet. You know, we as Democrats were way out in front on some really good stuff, but it was bubbling up from the grassroots in a sense, and it took a while to pull it all together into a national program. So the real turning point, I think, in terms of you know, us kind of making sure that we were doing things on a national scale, came actually when Governor Dean became the chairman of the Democratic Party. So, you know, he really sort of took a vision for doing this on a national scale and moved it forward institutionally.
There's an interesting side story to that. He got, according to what I read, into a fight with Harold Ickes, with whom it's easy to get into tiffs with. He being a longtime Democrat, Hillary Clinton Democrat, New York Democrat. Not the easiest personality in the world, I think most people would admit. And did Dean make a deal with him to buy from his outfit Catalyst information?
Well, what you had happening at that time is a couple of major efforts to sort of get this stuff right on a national scale. So, you know, and actually, so Governor Dean and the DNC were really sort of taking some of the technologies that we had employed working with the state parties, taking a lot of the stuff that Governor Dean's amazing technology people on his campaign had started to pioneer, and he started to kind of put it all together. Meanwhile, Harold Ickes and his organization Catalyst were starting to do a lot of the same kind of work, starting to actually try to build out a national file, and starting to really sort of become an organization that would really help to master the art of the micro-targeting. They were doing that often in a private enterprise. So, I mean, those two...
That's when you came into the picture, no?
Well, we had been building the software to deliver all this stuff at the state party levels. When we really came into the sort of the national picture was when the DNC hired us, the Democratic National Committee, that's right, hired us to do what we were already doing, build the software to deliver all this data and these tools on a national scale. They hired us to at the very, very beginning of the 2008 election cycle.
You're building the tools for the database. Who keeps the database? Who's got the 160 million names?
Well, the DNC is they maintain the database that is used by party activists throughout the country. and what we've built is essentially the front end to it, the tools that give thousands of activists access to that data, and more importantly, the ability to sort of go out, talk to voters, learn more about them, and move that data in there. Because the micro-targeting effort, its success is dependent on the more information, the more underlying information we know about voters, the more we know about, the more that we know where they stand on issues, where they stand on candidates.
So I just find this whole thing so amazing. So basically, the tools you give to the Democratic National Committee are the result of you talking to the people in Brooklyn, to use our example, right? Then you build a profile of what you think the expectation is going to be as to whether those people will show up, how they will vote, so forth and so on, and then that goes into the database kept by the Democratic National Committee.
Sure. The more data you have on people, the better you'll do in each succeeding campaign. So when we started doing this, we started doing it seven years ago. It was 3 election cycles before this one. We started doing it in Iowa, actually. Here's a case where, keep in mind, a database of a couple million people not very long ago was a very difficult thing to maintain. I mean, so if you go back in time, just 10 years,
right.
In 1998, no state party had a database that was easily accessible to its activists. Just 10 years ago, you couldn't take a database of 2 million Iowa voters, or God forbid, 8 million or 10, 12 million voters in some states, and put it on a computer that was easily accessible to anybody. And so back then, there were firms that would maintain these voter rolls on sort of mainframe computers. And if the campaign wanted to mail Democratic-leaning women in a particular area, they would sort of go to the firm and say, hey, can you send me the mailing labels? And they'd produce the mailing labels and ship them to people, and they'd pay per unit. This is very awkward. And if you went knocking door to door and you collected more information about people, it was very hard to get it into that same database. So what we started doing back in, this is now 2002 already, is we finally sort of said, hey, let's take this data, where we worked with the Iowa Democratic Party. We had a very competitive U.S. Senate race in Iowa, a very competitive governor's race, and lots of other candidates in Iowa. And we said, let's put this thing on the internet, and let's build an application where every Democrat in the state can share the same underlying database of 2 million registered Iowa voters, and everybody can contribute to it. And from here on in, every piece of information that gets contributed to this thing will keep building out more and more and more a profile of people that will be maintained. Because I'll tell you what, in the old days, after an election, if you went door to door and you wrote down all kinds of information, there was lots of stacks of paper and boxes in the corner of the campaign office that nobody knew what to do with.
So, but is there a 2 million, I forget the number, 160 million voter database that's accessible to people on the net now? In other words, can I contribute to that?
It's accessible to activists. I mean, everybody who, well, I should say, the vast majority of users who get access to this data are accredited users. Someone has vouched for them. Someone has given them a password protected, a username and password.
Right.
Into
Now,
the system.
on that database, we'll find the information that you've put into it. Basically, is that right? With respect to the predictability of 160 million people.
Well, that's right. I mean,
160 million people. You got predictability?
Well,
No, really?
Yeah, it's true. Sure.
Well, but how about people's privacy? Somebody wondered once.
Sure. Well, there are a couple of issues there with privacy. I mean, at a certain level, Jim, there's when you
There's
talk
no
about
privacy
when you talk
anymore,
about this commercial marketing data, let's face it.
There's no privacy.
Yeah. When you did you read all the fine print on the back of the thing last time you applied for a credit card?
That's a stupid question. It's supposed to be privacy, but I'm surprised that I'm in that database and you put something in there about me. You've got something about me and the proclivities with respect to how I'm going to vote, which is either based on calling me, but I never remember talking to you.
Sure.
So you talk to someone in my neighborhood, and okay, so now what happens? There's a couple of things that I'm curious about. I read that when to use the example that I'm in the database, I move from New York City, let's say now, which is after the election, and I moved to San Diego, and I guess I would well, even if I moved, do you know that I've moved?
At a certain point, we sure do, and there are a couple of ways that we do that. I mean, this is, it's one of the many headaches of this of doing this stuff is kind of trying to keep track of how to reach people, where they live, what their phone numbers are, and one of the things that we accomplished by sort of taking this data and making it available to lots of activists was we enabled them to help us keep track of all this stuff, and so, when one Democrat, when we first put this thing up on the web in Iowa, every time any Democrat running for any office tried to call you and found out that we had your wrong number, or found the correct number for you and put it in there, every other Democrat benefited from that. There used to be the age-old problem. We used to contact people who were dead, and we'd keep sending them mail, and we'd keep trying to contact them.
Wait a minute, I moved to San Diego.
I'm not even meaning to kill you off yet.
No. But yeah, you're going to find that out too, right?
Sure.
But I moved to San Diego, and so what someone calls me, how do you find out I moved to San Diego?
Well, I mean, a few things happen. One, somebody calls you and your number doesn't work anymore. So somebody says this is the wrong number for this guy.
Where's that go? In the database?
Goes
or
in the database. It goes in the database. Yeah.
And then what happens?
And then, well, there's a variety of things. One of the things that happens is data is very frequently acquired from the Postal Service, because at some point you probably went to the post office and filled out one of those yellow forms.
Oh, I see.
That's the
So
national.
that goes in the database. Who's putting that stuff in the major database? Is someone in the National Committee doing that, or are you assisting in doing that?
The DNC acquires a lot of the
so the
data that
DNC
does
got
that,
the fact that my mail was returned. Okay, so now I'm out in San Diego, and you have helped figure out why that I'm there, and it's time for me to be at one target out of 160 million. Do you effectively dream up a pitch? What do you do? What do you dream of? If someone knocks on my door, do you tell them what to say because you figured out I'm there and why you know all my deep dark secrets?
Well, sure. I mean,
what do you mean, sure? Jeez, I find that frightening.
Well, the idea is you want to make the most of the information that you have. We want to figure out what to do with you. I mean, the fact that you're in California probably means we're a little bit less concerned about how you're going to vote in the presidential election than if you happen to be in a place like Ohio.
But that's a good. Let's stop on that one. Is the micro-targeting that we talked about at the top of the show, in which the speaker, Mr. Hamburger, said that it was used particularly in the battleground states.
Sure. Yeah.
So I mean, the fact I'm sitting here saying 160 million names, the resources are allocated. So you go after Ohio, you go after Virginia. You don't go after California because California's in the Democratic camp. Well, I'm now in Virginia. I've just moved to Virginia. Okay. So now you got a pitch for me in Virginia, and where does that come from? Do you help make that pitch? Do you actually tell the computer what to say? But you give the computer enough demographic facts that someone constructs the pitch to me? How does that work?
We're giving the organizers the tools to figure out what's the pitch to give to you. And the pitch is going to depend. I mean, whether we have reason to believe that you are very likely a supporter of my candidate, then we're going to go to you and we're going to try to engage you. We're going to try to get you to come in and be part of the operation. And as it gets closer to Election Day, we've got one thing in mind, and that is to make sure that you've cast your ballot. And we're going to keep track of whether you have already voted, and if you haven't voted, we're going to harass you until you do. But then if we think that you're a persuadable person, if we think you're somebody who is open-minded to our messages, we want to deliver the message to you that you care about.
Unbelievable. Let's put up on the screen here what Karl Rove said about all of this, okay? Democrats have successfully developed tools to exploit online advocacy, and Republicans must spend more time and energy doing the same. The web edge we had through 2004 is gone. What did you do to beat Karl Rove at his own game?
Well, it's nice to hear it coming from Karl, because I've always had a suspicion that we had leapfrogged ahead of them, as I mentioned earlier. We were doing scattered, interesting stuff. A lot of different people doing scattered, interesting stuff. And once a couple things happened. Once Howard Dean and the DNC said, "Hey, we're going to take this thing. We're going to build a national program, 50-state program."
Right.
we talked about the battlegrounds, but the
Right.
fact is, the Governor Dean has truly tried to do this at the 50-state level.
50-state strategy, right.
And then a really remarkable, so we were starting to really get the act together at a national level, and then a remarkable thing happened, truly remarkable. We ended up with a presidential nominee who is an organizer by profession. And this is somebody, this means that we're led by somebody who basically really believes in knowing who people are and communicating with them and bringing them into the campaign.
Mark, you're being modest.
How's that?
I mean, your database cum is better than what Rove has got. There's no Mark. There can't be any Mark Sullivan. There can't be any Mark Sullivan on the Republican side, or else they would have kept the advantage. How they had a huge advantage. I mean, some people think, the speaker at the beginning of the program, they won the election in 004 because they had a better micro-targeting thing. Certainly, the huge margin they got, 3 million, is attributable in some part to their advantage. So don't you? Well, anyway.
Well, my take on this is I don't think we won the election because of data or technology. I think we won the election because of people.
People
and the data and the technology were about empowering those people.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a theme that we come up with time and time again when we talk about technology on this program. It enhances, but if it's not there, you might lose.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and this is, the nuts and bolts of making an organization like this works is incredible. What it takes. I mean, if you think about any kind of a business, your most important resource is your human resources. I mean, because part of my company's expenses is our payroll, but in a campaign where things move at a very rapid pace, you have the opportunity of, even literally millions of people who want to somehow contribute to this campaign or something in some way.
And by the way, the only way you can organize them is digitally.
It's very difficult to do.
You can't organize all those people. So I think you're being a little bit modest, because the Democrats in the past organized all those people through labor unions in some large part. And everyone thought in the 004 campaign, when there was a huge turnout over the preceding year, it's got to be good for Democrats, because huge turnouts always were in the past good for Democrats. No, a turnout was good for Republicans. I always have wondered, and now I know the answer. How many points do you think it's good for? Now let's. I mean, there are some numbers out there, but I would like to hear yours. There was a 7-point margin that the Democrats beat the Republicans by. What do you think the points are attributable to part of your operation?
Well, I've always considered that the actual field operation, the ground game, is really good for 2 to 5 points.
Well, that's close.
Right. Yeah.
All right, now guess what? We've come to the end.
That's happened already?
Yeah, it's happened already. I've got to ask you a question. Are you Senator Obama's secret weapon?
I think I'd put it different. No, I think that the secret weapon is organizers who went out there and made face-to-face contact with voters all across the country.
Delivering your message.
Delivering the message.
Delivering your message. You prepared for me when I moved from California to Virginia. Unbelievable, Mark Sullivan. Thanks a lot for coming by. Thank you for coming by. Come by next week and learn more about the digital age. For the digital age, I am James Goodale. Good night and have a good week.